All right, welcome to Trusted Identity in Digital Banking and Beyond. I'm going to be moderating this session. My name's Davey, and I'm with Early Warning Services. I've been with Early Warning for about a year, and my responsibility set is leading all of our identity and risk management products. We're going to introduce our panel. So we're missing one person here because we've had a late entry, which is we're very excited to have Kashif join us. But we've got Brian Russell, who's the Senior Vice President, Head of Enterprise Platform Identity Management and Authentication at US Bank. He has over 30 years of experience, leadership experience, working in a variety of financial services organizations. Dr. Tina Srivastava, who's an author, rocket scientist, entrepreneur, technology expert with advanced degrees in engineering, aerospace from MIT, and is also the co-founder of startup Badge. And Kashif Siddiqui, who's the Emerging Payments Innovation Executive from Bank of America, responsible for managing the innovation pipeline and transformation in the payment space. All right. So the first thing we're going to dive into here is really around the environment changing based on COVID. There's been an acceleration in digital transformation and many challenges that have come along with that. One thing that I'd love to hear from the panel is, in terms of that change in digital transformation, where have you seen some of the trends bubble up? And what are your observations and perspectives on what's going to happen in the future? Tina.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think that I come from a different perspective in this industry. As you mentioned, coming from aerospace engineering and after MIT at Raytheon, building large electronic warfare systems. I've always been passionate about security, and we noticed some vulnerabilities in how we transferred.
Oh, your mic. Top, right here.
Is that better? All right. Sorry about that. Yeah, Chris, so my perspective on this industry has been shaped from coming from a different world, from aerospace engineering, as you mentioned. And after MIT at Raytheon, I was building large electronic warfare systems. I've always had a knack for security, and when I noticed some vulnerabilities in how we transferred waveforms to our sensor systems, I actually started a previous startup to address that problem. And we had customers in the private and public sector, which meant that I had a security clearance, since one of our customers was US Strategic Command. And we chatted about this, that what really drew me to identity was that because I had a security clearance, my fingerprints, these fingerprints right here, and everything I used to answer a security verification question was stored in that database of the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. And so when that was compromised, it was an eye-opening moment for me, that how can it be that in order to prove that I'm Tina, I have to give up everything I use to prove who I am? And I can't revoke or reset my fingerprints. And so that really made me think about the importance of privacy and not having these stores of PII. And that's really what led me to found Badge, which does identity without secrets and eliminates those PII stores. And I think the biggest trend that we're seeing today, coming out of the pandemic and where we are and what consumers are focused on, is about privacy and about protecting their personal data.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and certainly a powerful experience having your biometric data being compromised because it's in a central location and you don't have that control or, frankly, the transparency to know what's happening. That would be a little unnerving. Kashif, do you have any thoughts on kind of the future as we've gone through the COVID digital transformation and what the future looks like for identity?
Sure. I mean, so I think one of the key things here is as our customers are starting to see everything online or via mobile app, and there's increasing electronification of not only your information, your payments, your identity in many locations, we see our customers going to these multiple different sites, platforms, and entering their information. So in an era when everything is online, and previously you had this mentality of, well, hold on, I'm only going to share my information in this scenario. But now everywhere you go, you're being asked to share your identity and details that you would otherwise not do. So what we see is an increasing, there's an increasing reliance on online modes, and then also customers are at the same time becoming more immune to sharing personal information. So as they're going to these different sites, I think it's really important that we're developing capabilities and we're enabling our customers to be where they want to be safely and securely.
That's great. And Brian, any thoughts on our shift?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I totally agree with my fellow panelists here. I thought it was really interesting this morning, if you had a chance to watch Nishant's presentation about privacy and trust. And I think a lot of what you'll hear us talk about and what we're trying to do for our customers is continually build that trust. It's incredibly important, and we're all moving towards this much more CX, human design oriented approach to the business. So I completely agree. Just some of the other trends I've seen within the bank itself from a more tactical standpoint is my job doesn't get any easier every day. You know, when you start looking at the last 3 years and what's happened with COVID, we're all very well aware of what happened with PPP. I mean, great points about the digitalization. You have all these companies coming online. You've got fintechs growing. You've got crypto companies coming out that all need identity verification. And we just see the fraudsters continue to attack. Now, the PPP has dropped off, but these guys continually to be creative, continue to be smart. They find the loopholes that we have in our systems and continue to attack it. So we kind of see them moving away from PPP back to more traditional methods. But I think we're all building great platforms. I think that you know, the vendor community has come a long way, so I thank all of our partners out there. It's been a great event to be able to talk to folks and learn about different capabilities, because it's all about building that layered security, because they keep just coming at us. And the best news is we're catching more of them. There's just more of them out there, and they're smarter. But those are the key trends that I see from a bank standpoint.
That's great, Brian. Thank you. And so we're going to leave it with Brian for the next question. You know, speaking about all the, I guess, the dynamic nature of the fraud threats out there, as we continue to see it evolving, you know, what's your thought on synthetic identity fraud and the prevalence of it, as well as what are the trends in terms of stomping it out and trying to reduce it over the next few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. At U.S. Bank, the way that we approach all of our capabilities is look at our security ecosystem. So we really look at all of the pieces fitting together. So I run identity management and authentication, but we have perimeter controls, device controls, we've got fraud systems, transactional systems, we've got internal data scientists building models, and all of those pieces fit together and all of the data flows between all of them. So it's really important for us that all the pieces are working in harmony, and we have a layered approach for security. But identity verification is the key. Once a bad guy gets in there, they're in there. You know, I think we do a really good job in credential management and authenticating, but if I'm authenticating a fraudster, it's a big problem. But we've continued to build out our platform. We have a number of vendor partnerships. We look for all these different solutions to plug these gaps, and that's really kind of been our key to success, number one. Number two, we have one platform that sets consistent rules and policies across all product lines. So we don't have 7 risk groups and 7 product groups trying to manage the same type of risk. And that's really the beauty of building enterprise-wide platforms. It basically takes the responsibility off of these folks, and as everyone out here knows, this is a complex, nuanced business. It's really easy to get the 101, but trying to get into the 301 and the 401 is really hard. So building these integrated platforms that have these great tools, the flexibility, the reporting, and the ability to adapt to real time, and adding new capabilities to be able to validate people when they're remote. Whatever we need to do to provide the great customer experience, it's all about that layered security.
That's great. Any other comments? Tina, do you have any thoughts on synthetic identity?
I was just saying I agree with Brian's comments.
All the orchestration and the importance of connecting the nodes. Obviously, it's a multifaceted focus area for everybody where we have to have multiple solutions. You have to connect them all together to make it successful in terms of preventing those guys from getting into the system. You know, as we start to reflect on the changes over time, you know, quite often government will invest in R&D to help support advances in technology. Where do you think the role of government fits with identity verification as it continues to evolve and support consumers and businesses?
Great question, Chris. I am very passionate about this subject. As you know, I wrote a book called Innovating in a Secret World, talking about that private and public relationship. And just as you were referring to, the keynote today also highlighted one that's top of mind for all of us with the IRS and some of the challenges that can happen with these central PII stores by private companies. And I think this is a big challenge. You know, the government has served that role from the beginning of holding the information of their users. And we now are facing a situation where the government needs to leverage the innovation from the private sector in order to effectively provide those building blocks that Brian was talking about. But we also face an issue where we need to make sure that users retain agency over their identity. And we can't have a situation where a private company holds the identity and the private keys of users. And so that's become a really important aspect when we think about the private-public relationship, how we can ensure that users retain that control over their identity, over their private key. And there are a number of initiatives that are working to address this, one of them being the ADI Association, where Badge and Early Warning are founding members, really addressing this issue about privacy and how we can ensure that users, again, retain that control and agency while still having, you know, the innovations of the private sector being able to be utilized by the government to enable and keep up with these challenges that we're discussing.
I think that's really important. I know Kashif has some perspective on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, as Tina mentioned, the government would by and far possibly be one of the largest identity providers, right? But in the same way, the consent, the management of it is you know, the devil's going to be in the details. Looking just more globally, the Nordics have implemented, you know, kind of a national ID scheme. India has implemented a national identity scheme. So, you know, there's a tremendous network effect, right? If done correctly, it could very quickly enable not only business, not only government use cases, but also it would enable business use cases and consumer use cases all over the place. So, you know, the key really becomes finding that model in which the ecosystem can all interact with each other appropriately.
And Kashif, do you see the U.S. following those patterns at this point, just as a you know, a course of observation or perspective, or is it still in the early stages of the federal government starting to step in and get it more involved?
I think it's still the early stages, right? I think that we need to look at it more closely, and I think that there will be many opportunities to kind of inform that. But going forward, it's not a if, it's a when.
Yeah, it makes sense. So certainly, if you're seeing the models out there around the globe being implemented, they've been out there for many years. The testing's been done, and now it's a matter of probably creating the right model for the U.S. That will fit the needs of the population here. As we look out to the acceleration of digital commerce ultimately, and our increasing reliance on the identity verification in a digital world, one of the things that I'm really curious about is we're modeling these frictionless commerce experiences in e-commerce. We're trying to eliminate any sort of friction so people will purchase and engage, making it easier for consumers to buy goods and services. At the same time, we need to protect the businesses from fraudsters, right? And so there's this natural balance between making it really easy to purchase and supporting consumers' intent, as well as their privacy, data privacy being really important, Tina, and their control over their identity, while still protecting the businesses as they go forward into the future. How do you see this notion of a dynamic digital identity evolving? And I know, Brian, you've got some thoughts on this, but I'd love to kind of hear where it's going to actually lead us down the road.
Yeah, I think, as we've all said, it's critically important. I think as you listen to, all of the sessions here, you realize as an individual and as an industry expert how critical trust is, how critical data privacy is in consumer choice. And at U.S. Bank, that's really been our focal point. I mean, we've really taken the lessons from some of our competitors who were more nimble and really came out with some amazing experiences for their customers. So there's a lot of focus for us for providing a much better experience, a human design driven experience. We don't want to make it feel like a chore. We want to give them the tools to be successful. We really want to build their trust because we are managing their money, we're protecting their money, and we're protecting their assets. And that's a critically important strategic theme across the bank, is making sure that we're building these journeys and building these platforms so that consumers build their trust in us and what we can do for them. And identity and authentication is kind of core to that, building those credentials and eliminating the friction. And you've probably heard in other sessions, well, if you eliminate the friction, does the customer actually know you're even doing anything? And that's a nice challenge to have today. I mean, as we all know, we still have customers that, don't want to give us their phone number. So I'm not sure how much FIDO is going to help. But, if they use their browser, we can do it that way. But we have this mix of customers, and we have to make sure that we are providing them this great experience and they feel like we have the control. And it's really, as we build that, we're looking at what different ways can we leverage that trust with the customers and provide other services. And that's why we continue to look at all different types of partnerships and innovation around digital identity. Whether it's federated or decentralized or self-sovereign, we are interested in testing them all just to see what our customers think. Are our customers comfortable with these approaches? Are they more comfortable with these than they are with starting a new relation with all these other companies? So there's a lot of learning to do, but what's really important for us as part of this effort with Authentify is that it does leverage our digital assets. It leverages that relationship. So when the customer consents, when they want to share data with a trusted partner, it goes through our app. So there's that bonding, that's that building of trust and security. And that's really what we're trying to figure out, is what direction do our customers want to go? And it's important that we give them the choice. So we give them choice for notifications, choice in products. We have a security center so they can go in and choose. If they want to do MFA on every single interaction with us, they can do that. But it is about providing them that choice, educating them, continually working with our partners to bring in new technologies and new solutions to provide that better experience, a safer one, a better experience for everything they do with us, whether it's moving money, opening account. But we're excited about stepping out a little bit here with this Authentify program and seeing how we can leverage that trust that we've built with our assets and see is this a great direction to go. So we'll continue to look at other opportunities, but I think as we look at where does the industry go and where does our business go, it's driven by our customers. So if we don't get out there and test some of these projects and see how they work, we're not going to know. So I think that there's an important lesson that you hear again through all these sessions. You know, you have to communicate clearly with the customer, engage with them, give them options, trust them, let them trust you, build those relationships. So with everything we do around authentication and identity, I read a stat recently, it's 46% of customers interact with their bank every single day. Well, if they do that, 46% use my capabilities every single day. So it's not some security thing that sits in the background. It's what customers are dealing with every single day. So I think there are great opportunities out here, and it's really important to always listen to the customer. And the choice and privacy and consent are really important themes that we're seeing in our research, and we'll see as we roll some of these new products out.
Go ahead, Kashif. Oh, Tina, you're up.
Well, I just wanted to underscore some of the points that Brian made, because I think that banks have an important role to play. And one of the reasons that trust exists is that the business model of the bank is not to monetize your PII. And I think that's really important when we think about the different players in the ecosystem and what their incentives are. The PII, we talked about the private-public relationship. Banks are a regulated industry, and the way that PII is handled is with the utmost care. And that's really critical as we talk about identity and personal information and how this data is stored and handled and which parties hold it. Oftentimes, we think about a hacker is trying to break through the castle walls to steal the crown jewels. And a lot of technologies are focused around building higher walls to protect those crown jewels, our PII. Well, what if there weren't any crown jewels stored? From my OPM experience, I know that if your data is stored, it's just an inevitability before it is hacked and compromised. And so eliminating those PII stores is critical. And that's why, at Badge, we focused on being able to derive your key on demand so that the private keys are not stored and that threat surface is reduced. And that's really critical. And when we think forward about privacy and the points you were making, Brian, about user consent, user consent really is based on the core principle that the user has control over their private key. And if we have situations where that private key is centralized or held by some other identity, some other entity, then it becomes difficult to really ensure that user consent is maintained. So absolutely, really wanted to underscore those themes.
Thanks. I think just echoing and agreeing with all of what's been said here, some of you might be thinking, all right, well, why is a payments guy here on this identity forum? I think, the key is that we see our customers' behavior and we see more of what's going on with their transactions, and identity is continuing to become an integral component, right? So instead of just having an identity, it's a profile. It's a profile that enables a use case. Oftentimes enabling a use case means you enable a payment. Sometimes it's, making sure that what you're doing is holistically servicing the customer's need. And then going back to what Tina was saying about, data sharing versus not sharing. As banks, we don't want to share our data with anyone because we have a responsibility, as Brian mentioned, to safeguard our customers' information. So when we're looking at opportunities to enable customer experiences, there's a lot of weight placed on the fact that we are not sharing number one, when we share it's with consent, as was mentioned. Number two, when it's shared, it's not stored, right? So even when we're looking at some of these solutions like Authentify, there's no data that is stored, right? It is simply facilitating the passing of information.
I think that's a great point. And Tina, it certainly resonated for me, the idea that you've got these central stores of PII. There isn't a single store anymore, right? It's fragmented, and you've got a proliferation because there's many entities out there that are collecting the data and creating these kind of centralized storage locations, which as a consumer is frightening because my information is everywhere. And so it's an interesting balance to strike between how do you kind of manage that proliferation of PII being held by a bunch of different parties and then trying to facilitate the identity, which ultimately is a dynamic thing that's going to persist now with us in this digital world that we're evolving into. It's both frightening and exciting, I think. And I definitely, Kashif, I agree that the concept of the payments use case it makes a lot of sense. Certainly from early warnings perspective, we built Zelle, so for us, payments is very close to heart, and identity goes hand in hand with payment transactions, especially when you need the high assurance levels in order to transact high risk payments. So one last question that I would love to hear a perspective on is, as we look into this new world with digital identities that are going to persist into the future, what is the bank's role in digital identity and for your consumers and for your businesses facilitating commerce? I'm curious where you see the bank within that ecosystem. And we'll start with Kashif, because you've got the mic.
All right, there we go. Look, I think I led with this, and I'll just reaffirm it. We need to service our customers. We need to service them in the manner that they would like to be serviced. We need to service them where they would like to be serviced. So as digital identity progresses, the banks have this direct relationship with our customers. We already see our customers using third parties to share information. We've already recognized some of the pitfalls that are associated with that in the transactional space. So, learning from all of that, we're going to continue to develop solutions and enable our customers to securely kind of share this information, because at the end of the day, that's the relationship that we have with our customers.
That's great. Brian, your thoughts?
I elaborate a little bit earlier on in terms of what we're looking to do for digital identity. We're certainly looking at a variety of different opportunities in the market, but there's so much going on in this space when you look at what's happening, for example, in open banking. When you engage in open banking, you're using the same credentials that you're using when you log in. So when we start looking at what's occurring there, and when we start looking at how are we digitally building product packages and bringing at U.S. Bank these diverse lines of business together and cross-selling, it's bringing these identities together and these credentials together. So we're actually building a much stronger, customer-centric digital identity within our ecosystem. And again, we'll try to look outwards, but if you think about the fact when a customer comes in and does a lot of personal and small business work with us, there's a wide range of products that they engage with us on. So we need to have that consistent experience for them, which means they have one digital identity within the bank, and it continues to get validated and it continues to service them. The worst thing I could do is have a customer have 5 different accounts on 5 different platforms and 5 sets of credentials. And yes, I can do SSO, but you have to go through SSO, which, as we all know, it's not fun. You have to go through the registration process. So even internally, there's this transformation happening, trying to bring these enterprise platforms together, being able to look at the capabilities that we provide, and digital identity is one of those core ones. And as you build it internally and build that trust in the relationship, how do you then leverage it? And those are the things that we're looking at more externally, is what partnerships. What's really important about it is we are not going to lower our standards to make money. Like, as you said, we're out there to provide services to our customers. So when we look at partnerships, they have to meet the same criteria that we do as a regulated entity. So it's really important that we pick partners, good partners, we test well, and we make sure that we are increasing the trust and not lowering the trust. But it's an exciting time as we see this digital transformation. I mean, COVID was very challenging for all of us personally and professionally, but it's really kind of accelerated a lot of the work that we're all involved in here, and gives us some great opportunities, but some great challenges. And again, making sure that we are treating that information safely, securely, and with consent is foundational. So if we ever did anything that did not follow those mandates that we have internally, the customers are going to lose trust in us, and that's the last thing we want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kashif and Brian, you made some excellent points. And, what you were describing about this friction and pain when you have multiple devices, and that the current situation is you basically have to re-register on each one, and the pain associated with that. We've all felt that. We've all experienced that with our different devices, and how we kind of, as a consumer, we fall off this cliff as soon as we lose or break devices, change devices, we go on a new one, and how can we maintain our secure identity as we move throughout the world? Another insight from the keynotes this morning was we also have to service the whole world here. So not everybody has a dedicated smartphone with them. People access the banks and their consumer applications from multiple devices, shared devices, and how do we persist that identity when those are all of the avenues in which you're coming in? And so I think that's a really critical piece, especially as, what we're talking about is a long-term, durable identity. And in order to really establish that means it has to last longer than, my particular ownership of my device. And so to really, achieve that and reach this future vision, we really need to leverage these building blocks. One of the reasons that we focused in with Badge, with our customers in the banking side, is of course that ability to enroll once and authenticate on any device. With Authentify, being able to leverage that information that the bank securely already knows about the user is really critical. And these building blocks are going to be necessary to pave the road to the future, to enable this secure, durable identity that users can have agency and control over without being in fear of some, central private group holding their private keys and losing that binding between really you and your identity.
Yeah, it really feels like we're at the early innings of where this is going to go. I get excited, Brian, when you, and Kashif as well, where you're so customer-centric around how you're designing the systems, the platforms, the experiences, and ultimately the attributes around those profiles are going to continue to grow because you're looking at multiple services, products, their duration and tenure with you. I can imagine the profiles of those identities are going to become incredibly rich, which then requires you to protect them with absolute focus so that the identities can continue to grow in a durable way, but without any compromise. The other thing that stood out certainly is when there is so much oversight and regulatory focus, that's a big challenge for banks, but it's also probably a favorable thing for a lot of the consumers because they know that there's oversight, there's thoughtfulness, there's a lot of rigor that's gone into protecting the identities and the data so that they're not going to fall into a compromise. Well, thank you very much for your thoughts today. 3 takeaways from my perspective in terms of the conversation we've had. First is consumer control. Ultimately, if I'm, and this is certainly as a consumer, I'm really focused on this. I want to know who's got my PII data. I want to be able to revoke it when I decide. I want to configure who gets to see certain aspects. Data privacy, certainly Tina's story about having her biometric data compromised, that is unnerving, certainly. And it's something that I think is going to be underscored in everything that we do going forward. And then the last one for us is seeing the banks move into, certainly with Authentify, leaning into identity beyond the identity profiles within the banks themselves, but starting to look outside and say, we can support our customers as they interact with other entities because we have this stewardship of the data, we have this trusted relationship, and we're able to actually support them as they start to, whether they're interacting in commerce or other things. It's creating a new experience and a new relationship outside of probably the traditional mechanisms, which is exciting. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. We're going to move into Q&A, so if anyone has any questions for the panelists, you're welcome to fire them over. Okay, go for it.
A dilemma question about consumer privacy and data province that to me I think is a little bit confusing. Digital banking, KYC, seems to be proliferating as a requirement all over the world, and it seems to me that the requirements typically involve collecting PII and retaining that information for 7 years. So if I open an account with the bank, you're going to take my PII information and retain it for 7 years, and I don't have the ability to say, I'd like that information to be forgotten. So I'm just curious in this idea of saying, well, we want province on that, is why it seems that we're asking for more, give me your social security number, give me your date of birth, and let me collect that just to get started with the bank. And then there's the other side that obviously the banks have to comply with regulations, but the regulations say that the bank has to hold that information for 7 years. So where does that really kind of play out in this idea of having consumer control over the most important thing that could be stolen from them, which is their PII? And then the next add-on question is, shouldn't you be able to share your KYC credential from one bank to another? Why should I have to go from this bank to this bank to this bank to essentially reassert and re-give out that information to say, yes, I am capable of holding an account?
All right, there's a lot to unpack there. Oh, we're out of time. Sorry. No, great questions. About the redaction of data, I'd be happy to get your contact information. I don't know our policies around that as a bank. I think it's a great question and something we should have an answer to. I think that U.S. Bank is a very customer-centric bank, so I'm sure that we're very sensitive to that. But I don't know, honestly, the answer to that, what the exact policies are. With regard to regulatory requirements, yes. I mean, I've worked on the vendor side, I've worked in a number of different banks. To be honest with you, banks meet with regulators on a very frequent basis. Regulators are people. Regulators are just like vendors and other people that we work with in terms of partnerships. And that's the way we approach it, and we lay out how we approach our business. And there's honest discussions, but we all are required to follow those specifications, and they're exacting. So we collect the information that's required as part of the process. I think it's important to have some level of regulatory oversight. And I forgot your third question. I got two of the three.
I think it was around the token and why couldn't it be used across banks?
Yeah, that's a tougher one. We've got a pretty large innovation group, and they're looking at a lot of different scenarios and ways that we can do that. I think technologically, we can do it. There's business, legal, regulatory questions around it. But I think, again, if you step back and as I said before, what we're trying to do with Authentify is there's already these relationships in place in the way that we treat the data and we handle the data. We're established organizations. The contracts and the rules are all set up. So that's really kind of a great first step to get out there. And, with the banks that are participating, we have a significant number of active digital customers that are using our digital properties, our mobile apps today. So this is a way to engage them to take that first step. But those are all great questions, and those are things that we grapple with internally all the time. And it would be great to be able to provide those options. I don't think there's any silver bullet here, but this partnership here with Authentify is just the first one. We test it, the customers may love it, customers may not care, but let's test it. It's a really good partnership, and it's a natural extension, as we said, of what we're doing today and providing these services. And we'll test the other ones and see how they go. Sure.
To the third question, I will add that both Badge and Early Warning are engaged in working with customers that do in fact allow you as a consumer to not have to repeatedly provide your personal information, especially when it's not actually required. So an example might be that if you're a consumer making a purchase and the vendor needs to verify that you're over 21 in order to authorize the purchase, they don't actually need to know the specifics of your birth date, your address, your driver's license number. They just need to know that you're over 21. And so we have implemented products that are deployed in the market today that enable you to actually do a zero knowledge proof to confirm, yes, you're over 21 without exchanging more PII than is necessary.
Go ahead.
This is for everybody, but Cash App being in the payment space, Brian mentioned about, we do everything we can to make sure that we're authenticating the right customer into their account, and then it's kind of tough after that. In the use case where, you have a legitimate customer getting socially engineered to make a payment to a fraudster, with all of the new technology, what could we do to identify and authenticate the receiving party to prevent that fraud?
Well, there's a series of things that we are already implementing. When our risk models spit out something that says, oh, you know what, this isn't what Kashif usually does, or Kashif always buys gas from BP, not Shell, and what's he doing over there? No, I'm kidding, but you know where I'm trying to go. Essentially, number one, we're continuing to invest tremendously in the technology to make our detection much smarter. But in addition to that, we're developing capabilities for our customers to communicate with us in the process flow, right? So, number one, we send out OTACs on certain transactions. So when you're transferring large amounts of money between accounts, within Bank of America, it's one thing. Sending to a different organization is another thing, and that's a different set of parameters, and you may receive an OTAC for that. Vice versa, there's also the open banking and pay-by-bank stuff that's actually happening in Europe right now. And a lot of what you see is the bank's front door being inserted as part of the payment process, right? Especially as payments become faster, right? Faster and irrevocable. So the real-time payments network in the US allows for the speed and the ability for those full and final transactions to go through the door. But what are you putting in front of that to make sure that, number one, it's actually the customer, number two, we're not adding too much friction, but there's a healthy level of friction there, to Brian's point, when these transactions are occurring. So we're continuing to invest on that front and are working to make, as Brian said, the customer can move forward with selecting how they are communicated with and also how they're responding to multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, I know there's lots of signals in the transaction that you can use to detect fraud, but I guess my question was around, is there any work being done to identify and authenticate the receiving party so that we know that's not a fraudster? Because, versus the work being done to examine the transaction.
Yep. And I think, this service is definitely a step towards that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can also add that as we look at what we call our authentication hierarchy, you've got a whole set of tools. So when you focus on the device and the capabilities of the device, that's what we all really want to use is hardware-based encryption. So the challenge is that you can't, you could force people if you wanted to, that you can only bank with a trusted device. And that's a business decision. But where the challenge lays is where folks are uncomfortable sharing that device or sharing an email or a way that we can get a higher level of trust. MFA is, as we all know, has tons of challenges, and the social engineering is tough. I'm sure many of us, I know you have a personal case, but many of us have personal cases, and I always hear them when I come to these events, where even us that are super smart and do this every day get duped. And that's part of it. Our job is to try to close that. A lot of it is around the device, honestly, and providing more education, more capabilities to get people to use the highest level of security possible. But it's difficult. Call centers, every channel, people are taking advantage of it. And we understand it and we're working hard to block it. I think it's a great point. We have great risk systems that set off the bells. So I do believe that we're catching a lot of it. It's just there is a lot, and they're always finding weaknesses. Again, the technology's going to solve 80% of it. Like if we solve 80, at least I know I have to focus certain assets on the other 20. But we're constantly trying to figure that out. But it's really hard if people don't want to use the tools. We want them to bank. We pride ourselves on being diverse and inclusive. So we don't want to tell people you're required to do these certain things. So it's a challenge, and it's a terrible customer experience. So thanks for the question. I think you had some thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, just building off of this, and I think it's a really excellent question. And this is our big focus area, so I'd be remiss not to share. I mean, with Badge, we're basically based on a breakthrough in technology, an open 20-year problem in cryptography, which is exactly what you're saying. So this point about how, where are we stuck today to make sure that the person who enrolled is the person that's subsequently authenticating, really it's in these buckets of, they either are forced to use a registered device or we fall back to a call center, which is expensive and also not very secure. And so with Badge, what we've done is focused on, there are many ways that a user can prove that they're you. A lot of them, including biometrics, behavioral, contextual data, include a lot of PII, which, as we've all discussed, is the big challenge that we don't want to create a store of PII. So the breakthrough in the technology is to be able to derive on the demand a key pair associated with those factors such that you never have to store that PII or the private key. And that ability to securely authenticate at a high assurance across devices is the reason that we've had the success we've had in healthcare and banking. And so I think this is a critical issue that you've raised, and absolutely I think it's the future of where authentication is focused, because that's the real area that we can't be stuck in the era of call centers.
Thank you. So we're at time. We can go with one more question, though, real quick.
It was sort of expanding on
Sure.
that question. A lot of identity conversations are around B2C, who are not early warning customers. You know, telling them that vendor is that vendor that they're paying.
Yeah, great question. I'll start and pass it on. That expanding that identity to move outside of that one relationship. I think that the reason that it's locked there is many times because of the PII involved. And so if this can be done in a way that is zero knowledge, that doesn't require transferring PII, that's the only way to achieve that. And therefore, those are the models that have to be in place in order to enable that network effect that you're describing.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's tremendous number of solutions on the consumer side. There's not nearly as many on the business side. Well, let me put it this way. There's a tremendous opportunity, vendors, on the business side, because it's a problem, because we don't have the same tools. I mean, we're building capabilities that are going to address the shortcomings. But it is a challenge when you don't have the same data, you don't have the same tools, devices, all the components that we use on the consumer side. So we've got a strategic initiative looking at that, but it's a big challenge because you just don't have the data. But it's something that's critically important to us to build that out, and having an enterprise platform. Those are the things that we're looking at, is how do we simplify that and make it a competitive advantage to become a customer of U.S. Bank, because we provide you those services.
I mean, basically, I would just echo these sentiments. Yep.
Yep.
Thank you for the questions. Appreciate you guys coming out today. Thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.